The Committee of the Whole is back in session. Thank you very much, Senators, for being here. We're at Section 3 on page 6. On page 7, I'm sorry. Authorization to pay and prioritize the payment of tax refunds. Any objections? Senator Nicholas.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a number of questions with respect to how Section 3 aligns, because I'm trying to balance it on my end here. I notice on Section 3, it states that Imagalahan Guahan shall prioritize tax refunds for 2017 and 2018 prior year A status returns no less than 125 million. That's no less than. That's what we're making for the provision.
Yes, it is, Senator.
Now, I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting a proper reconciliation of the numbers. I don't mean to jump ahead, but I do see that in Section 5 we reference the ACTC, and in Section 6 we reference the Section 30 monies. And so what I'm trying to make sure I'm interpreting properly is that this 125 million is the provision, but that's not the actual amount that this budget's intending to set aside. It's that plus the amounts in Section 5 and plus the amounts in Section 6. And
the amount that's netted from the ACTC return.
Right, and the amounts in Section 6, Section 30 in excess of 63 million.
Correct.
So while we say no less than 125 million here, the actual amount is projected to be what exactly? Because it's 90% of the ACTC. ACTC is around 14 million.
It's 125 plus a projected either 19 or 20 in ACTC.
19 or 20, 90% of the 20 in ACTC is about 18 million, and then the other 5 million in Section 30. So it's another 23 million on top of the 125. So it's a total of 149. Okay, and I just wanted to get that on the record, Mr. Chairman, because it was testified in previous hearings on other legislation that the amounts that would actually be required to retire tax refund obligations does fluctuate into the 140s, 150s. So while this number does say 125 here in this Section 3, when you add back the amounts that you've allocated in Section 5 and in Section 6, it does bring it to the level that is historic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Especially in the way that we're doing the individual income tax this time as net of the ACTC. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, I believe there were some pending documents that we were going to get handed to us.
Yeah, I thought if we got through this, the pending documents would be on the expenditures, agency expenditures. So if we got through this.
I believe there's also a question about the tax credits that we were supposed to get. The Vice Speaker had a question yesterday about the tax credits early on in the day. And then there were some other items that we asked in the evening for. So the tax credits, we're looking for that, the amount that we spoke of yesterday. There was a roll-up that was supposed to be given to us today. A roll-up or some kind of itemized.
The 9+3 update that Senator Rodriguez and Senator Fernando requested?
On top of that, yes, and then the tax credit listing.
Yes, okay. John's looking for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. So can we just quick recess until we get those documents, Speaker? I think
It's not what we're discussing right now, but we will get to it,
I
and
think
they
it's-
will all be given out to you. I just didn't want,
I think
all
it's
the
germane,
documents.
Speaker, because if we're discussing these areas, I think, you know, the impacts of what we asked for does have an effect on the projections, the tax credit. And I don't think BBMR should be the one telling us when we should and should not discuss something.
I don't think he was. He was just saying that he realizes that we've already gone through this. And we're just trying to get through the rest of Chapter 1 at this
I
point.
know, Speaker. I understand that. If we could just have a recess for a couple of minutes, Speaker, so all of the body could get the handouts.
No, it's already been copied. We're just waiting for it to be. I'm trying to get everybody focused on where we're at. And doesn't have anything to do with this section. And if we can just get through this section, we'll get to that section and you'll be able to see the 9+3 that has been prepared by the administration. So, yes. And on section 3,
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up question on Section 3. I know that in the previous budget acts, the sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. In the section that you just, because it's a prior, we are only at a single-year budget. I will make sure that, I'm actually, if you wish, you can make the amendment that 2018 be struck.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
All right. On the motion to strike 2018 on lines and 2018 on line 7, so that it's clear that this is a single-year budget as opposed to a biennial budget. Is there an objection?
Mr. Chairman, I think didn't we establish yesterday that it's already an annual budget and it's just a matter of engrossment to remove all FY19 provisions?
Where those numbers are, but I'm just saying, as we go through it, if any of you see where you think it should be struck because it's a single year as opposed to biennial, I want to make sure that we don't forget it or you just point it out.
I'm fine with that. I just wasn't aware. So you want us to just strike as we go?
Yes, when we were doing the revenues, it was an entire column on the first 6 pages, so that was fairly easy. This one was just a slip up And even if we typed in 2019, it wouldn't have come up, so,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No objection to the amendment.
okay. So strike and 2018 on line 7.
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up question.
Sure.
I know that the provision for tax refunds that's mentioned in the itemized revenue projections, that basically is what sets the formula for the calculations of what is supposed to be deposited into the income tax refund trust account. This amount and the way this particular section is written doesn't specify that this figure is for the provision for tax refunds specifically. It just says that that amount shall be prioritized for tax refunds, but making it specific to the provision for tax refunds would actually make it apply to the formula that's supposed to be used to calculate the deposits into the income tax refund trust account. Is it necessary for us to include language there that that amount is as a provision for tax refunds?
That's statutory. They know that they have to pay 125th, I mean,
125th.
into the provision, yes.
Right, so it's not necessary to...
No, not in here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So on section 3,
Mr. Speaker, on the prior page, page 6, it says provision for tax refunds and then 125, but that doesn't need to show the parts in section 5 and section 6 that you highlighted earlier. It's okay to leave those, or are those amounts shown someplace else?
no, because it's net.
Okay.
It'll be added onto whatever is returned or reimbursed, and the fact that they have to make the payment. Those would, they take care, IRS takes care of that.
All right. Oh, could I just ask
Sure.
DOA one question about this? This amount. I know that I had asked Revenue Tax earlier, and they said this is sufficient. And I guess with your cash management, how do you foresee this set aside? Does it get set aside like 1/12 of it every month, or I don't know? How do you treat this provision?
The provision for tax refund, it's for the entire year, so it just depends on what is owed. It's just saying that as money's collected, that throughout the year, at the end of the year, at least 125 is set aside. The reason why it's not the full 140 that we pay out is because of the ACTC. It's offset.
And there's another provision that automatically mandates that ACTC will be, the reimbursement will be deposited into that trust fund. Okay.
Well, it's once it comes in, it's used to pay refunds. So it gets deposited into the tax efficiency account, and whatever's outstanding, we pay.
All right, and you think the 149 is sufficient? Does that meet our obligation?
Yes, yes. So we range from 138 million to 140. 149 is the highest I've ever seen it when looking at the past payments, but it is sufficient.
Okay, that's great. But it says also prior years, and even for that.
That's why it's so high.
Okay.
It's inclusive of prior years.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Section 3. Anyone? Section 4, revenue collections in excess of quarterly collections, and the requirement for a report to the Guam Legislature. That's a CRER. It's part of the CRER, but it's a comparative revenue statement that the legislature is supposed to receive. Any objection?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, I guess. It was brought up in a recent session that in this 12-month in page 7 on section 4, subsection A that we're discussing here, it reads, for each fiscal year 2018 and 2019, of course we'll amend out the 2019 part for now. For each fiscal year 2018, the Director of the Bureau of Budget and Management Research shall create a general fund 12-month revenue budget based on the revenue estimates in section 2 of this chapter relative to statistical weighting of historical collections by month, by collection category, and the general fund combined comparative statement of revenues report. Mr. Chairman, I have with me here a copy of this current fiscal year's budget, and it includes the same language. And what I wanted to discuss is, in a recent session, we had a conversation about Section 30 revenue and how that Section 30 revenue is being booked. And I believe it was you, when you spoke in that session, that stated that Section 30 money was actually being included as a monthly revenue category by BBMR. They were accounting for it on a monthly basis. And this statute, the current Budget Act, has the exact same language there, which mandates that they're supposed to be only booking those figures based on the statistical weighting of historical collections by month. But we don't bring in Section 30 on a monthly basis. So I wanted to ask why BBMR is reporting Section 30 on a monthly basis when statutorily they're only supposed to be reporting what they are collecting on a monthly basis, and they don't collect Section 30 on a monthly basis.
Yes, Senator. I'll have them answer, but I think for all the rest of the senators on the floor, and I'm hoping that they left one on your desk, there was a copy of the CRER from June, that for June 30th that ended. And on page 1 of 7, you will note about halfway down the page, section 30, that they do report Section 30 monthly, which is about 1/12, and if they want the answer to, they can answer the rest of it. I just wanted to point out that what I had mentioned was that in the CRER, every month they do have this section in there. Why or how they do that, I'll leave up to them.
Yeah. When we initially received Section 30 in September, it's recorded as a liability as unearned revenue. And basically, it's like an advance on a grant. Every month you earn a certain portion of the money that's been advanced to you. So the way it's recorded monthly is it's broken up into 12 months, and each month that portion is recorded as revenue for that particular month.
I understand you're reporting it as revenue, but this mandate is to report what you are collecting, and you're not collecting that revenue in that particular month.
When it's earned, it's considered collected. It's when it's recognized in accounting.
But the problem is that you're spending Section 30 money to make up for the prior year obligation of the tax refunds. And so how are you reporting that you're collecting that amount in that month when the money's already been spent?
Well, if you want to change the reporting requirements so that we record it all in the beginning of the year, I mean, you can certainly do that, but for accounting purposes, we would still record it earned every month for the financial reports.
My question is with respect to the mandate, because we keep carrying this mandate over, and it's mandating that you're supposed to report the collections. And as the chairman pointed out, you're reporting those in your CRER, but what it's doing is it's showing that the amounts that are being collected are at a certain level, when the reality is that that month doesn't even have that particular collection. So for example, in the CRER that we have here, the Section 30 for June 2017 says $7,734,000. But if that Section 30 money was already expensed in the beginning of the fiscal year, and that 7 million technically isn't there that June, that collection isn't there that June, because there's a very distinct difference between revenue and collection. And so if we actually less out the collection, then the total general fund revenue would not be 77 million, it would be 70 million. And, you know, that would have a very dramatic impact on the cash flow. So should we change the mandate to no longer reflect that? Because this is supposedly revenue collections in excess of quarterly collections. So should we specify that Section 30 money, Section 30 should reflect what's actually collected, because that's not what the report's showing.
The CRER that is presented by the administration, I believe, is done on an accrual basis. And though we did receive it in September, it was the accrual throughout the 12 successive months. And so that's how they're reporting it. If I understood accounting, I'd be an accountant too, but that's the crazy rules that they have.
The reason why it's necessary, Mr. Speaker, for us to, in my opinion, for us to be able to get a very true picture of what the collections are, is that when the numbers show that 7 million was brought in Section 30 when it actually wasn't, then any other revenue category, including in special funds, that shows a tracking that's higher than what was projected, might not necessarily be when you look at the big picture of what the overall budget is, it might not necessarily be a surplus or an amount that's available for appropriation. So for example, in years past, we would have collections coming in for the tourist attraction fund that are higher than what was projected. And the tracking would show that it's going to come in at an amount greater. And so we would go out and we would appropriate those money, assuming that everything else was coming in the way it was projected and the way that the collections were showing. But if you're actually getting the true collections from Section 30 and we're not amortizing it over a 12-month period because we spent it all at the beginning of the year, then we would probably be expending excess collections in other revenue categories in a different way. And so I think it's important for us to clarify at this juncture whether or not future CRERs are going to be showing Section 30 revenue that really isn't coming in for the month, because otherwise it might be encouraging us to spend money that could probably be used to make up for whatever shortfall will be accurately reflected if the numbers were showing the actual collections.
I can't remember which month, but I think it was March. Your CRER, what month? You guys could receive 9 million a few months ago. Section 30, there was a $9 million payment. And there was a bump up at that point, which saved them. Made it look good, because somehow they got a $9 million payment. I don't know what it was for, but they got a $9 million payment that was reported in the press, and then I saw it in the CRER. But the months are all starting to mesh together, so I can't remember which one it was. But I remember the news release about a $9 million, and then I remember in the CRER the fact that the $9 million was reported in the CRER, which made them not go past the 4%. So Section 4 really doesn't address that specific section in the CRER. It's just another one of the quarterly reports that they're required to make. The CRER is a monthly. This one's a separate quarterly report. The CRER is separately stated and set forth in statute.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. So is there a way that we can make a provision that when the Section 30 funds do come in, that they are supposed to be used what it's for? Because I understand it comes in a lump sum, and then throughout the year you account for it monthly. So we could be using that money for other things that we don't see, the people don't see as a whole. instead of what it's intended to use for. And I think that's the biggest challenge here with our budget is to include special funds. We're using special funds for what it wasn't intended for in the first place.
Section 30 is not a special fund.
No, I'm
Section
just using
30
it
is part-
as an example. Like, if we could put some kind of provision in here.
I will let them explain how they handle money in September and October. And I understand the predicament that they find themselves in. The retirees would rebel, and we would be overrun here at the legislature by retirees if we had a provision in the statute that said the Section 30 received in September the cash could not be utilized to cover the COLA payments that are due in October.
But is Section 30 funding supposed to go for COLA payments?
No.
That's
Section
like-
30
yeah,
is, no,
exactly.
Section 30 is general fund revenue. And all they're doing is trying to manage the cash. I can't believe I'm actually defending them. But,
Me neither.
but the thing is that I know that there was a move to take COLA and pay it out in 12 monthly installments. And I assure you, you can make a few phone calls and ask how the retirees would feel about that. I got my ear bitten off and other parts of my body bitten off by retirees when I suggested that.
Okay.
So
So
they
it
need,
has
they,
already
they
been
need,
suggested.
they need the flexibility to be able to use cash as it's needed. And if we were to try to restrict everything and mark each dollar bill that comes in and say that it's just this, things would stop. In a household, you may have made your mortgage payment, I mean, not your mortgage payment, but your loan agreement with your supposed salary from someplace else, like National Guard for you, when you were inactive or something. The fact that now you're in the legislature and you're paying it with legislative salary money doesn't mean that you're not complying with your loan agreement. You're paying for it. It's being paid. And the bank doesn't ask, are you sure this came from the National Guard one that we looked at 4 years ago when you were on active duty and you were deployed and you had all this additional money? It's not. As long as they get their money, they don't care where it came from. And the retirees, they want their money in October, and when you're here in October, you will start getting the phone calls. It's late. I thought I was going to get it on the 22nd. I keep telling them, no, it's the 31st, and as soon as they get the cash, they try to get the COLA payments out, and I assure you that would cause
Okay, thank you.
a run on this building.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess just two items. If this section here does not speak towards the CRER, but it speaks towards a separate report, could I get a copy of that report? I don't, because I've never seen this report, and if this report is supposedly going to show something different, I would like to see that. I was assuming that this report that's required in this section is the CRER because it would, I guess, overlap into that, but apparently this is a budget based on the revenue estimates relative to the weighting average of collections by month. I don't think I've ever seen a a budget based on collections by month.
In the CRER, when it gets to the quarterly, on a monthly basis, this part on page 3 is, the earlier page is blocked out, and then they put in the quarterly comparative analysis on page 3. Usually this page on page is blocked and it's blacked out because it's not quarterly, but because this one is as of June, it conveniently has been the quarterly. It is the end of the quarter. That's the end of third quarter. That's why this is not blacked out.
On page 3 on the CRER that were provided here.
Yes.
And it just further underscores, Mr. Chairman, the reason why this is important to clarify, because if you look at the last column there, it shows the increase or decrease year over year. And you'll see that the section 30 row shows an increase of 12 million from tracking to projection. But then when you go to the bottom, you'll see that total general fund revenue is short 17 million for that period. But if you actually took out the section 30 money, because technically it wasn't there, that would exacerbate that loss to a total of 29 million.
No, the reason why the section 30 shows a favorable increase is because I don't know how they divide up it doesn't go on exactly 12 equal amounts. For some reason they have, I don't have the earlier months, but they do have a different amount in the earlier one. You can see on section 30 that in this month they're only reporting 6, but in previous they had 7, or they do a different, it was the fact that they received 9 million earlier that makes that look good. I don't have a copy of that month that has that $9 million payment. I keep remembering March, but.
My point, Mr. Chairman, is that the FY 2017 adopted revenue of 74 million and the FY 2017 revenue tracking of 87 million. But if even that 74 million or that 87 million was all expense at the beginning of the year to pay for tax refunds from prior year, then the amount that's available for the reconciliation is neither 74 million nor 87 million. And so when you put the actuals there, it would reduce that 12 million favorable increase, and it would affect the bottom line general fund revenue, which already is showing a loss of 17 million, and it would exacerbate it further because that section 30 revenue is no longer attributable to the general fund for that fiscal year because the money's not there anymore.
Okay, what I might suggest at this point is bookmark section 4 in the next couple of hours or next couple of days. If you and one of them can meet to figure out what it is that you would like to have in this section?
I think what we would need to do is on the reporting, you have a section 30 here, but then you have another row right under it that says less amount spent for prior year obligations. And then do a net section 30 revenue tracking. That way we'll see the exact amounts that we're dealing with as the reports come in. Because at 74 million, we're tracking it as if the full amounts have been received for the fiscal year, but a huge chunk of it was spent already. And so if we want to have a true accounting of where we are based on the report and based on what really is available, we need to less out what's been spent for prior year. So maybe we can probably come up with language that says tracking the revenue less amount expended for prior year obligations.
Okay, well, what I'm going to ask is that we bookmark this, and then you speak to them and try to figure out how in accountingese you can write that language. It really is a language that I don't understand. She and I are constantly having fights about the accrual method and post-stating and claiming earlier months. So
Mr. Chair,
there,
I
it's
have a
GASB
question.
language. If you can, if I'll bookmark this, and the three of you that want, who know anything about GASB, can sit down and try to write the language on how to be able to get around this. I'm sorry, but
I just have a quick question, Mr. Chairman.
please.
With the GASB governmental, with the GASB, and a question for the director of DOE, with the GASB Governmental Accounting Standards Board, does that allow for, since the Section 30 was advanced, does that allows for the monthly tracking,
Yes.
as I understand it, correct?
Yes, that's the proper way to record the revenue. In the same way that when federal funds are advanced, it's earned when it's expended, and so it would be posted to the appropriate month. So it's the same kind of concept, but from our perspective in the administration, whatever reports that we submit to the legislature is dictated by you folks. So if you want to change the report, you can change the report, but in as far as accounting rules and how we put together the financial statements and properly account for funds, it would have to follow the Government Accounting Standards Board rules.
And this is fairly typical, because when they look at it, even if you were advanced the money, even let's say with the loan, once you expend it, that's when you account for it, because that's supposed to balance out the books at the end
Right.
of the fiscal year.
Right.
Per se, okay.
Yeah, and we could not, we must, in putting together the financial reports, we must follow the Government Accounting Standards Board rules. So, and as far as that would not change at all, but if you want us to do a report any way you want, I mean, that's the legislature's priority, I mean, our prerogative.
So, I mean, it'd be, I don't think the numbers would add up to a nice amount if you were with the monthly accounting of the Section 30, because it really depends on how you spend it per month, right?
It wouldn't, so if you had a report that did not follow the accounting rules, when you see the financial reports for the government of Guam, it would be difficult for you to reconcile.
I understand. And again, there was a question I had yesterday regarding, I was wondering if you had any different information on when the war reparations were to be paid out, whether that's 2018 or 2019?
I
on
did put the
FY?
request to the governor's office. I didn't have a chance to follow up with them to get the information back. I apologize, but I will follow up this afternoon for you. And
Okay.
as soon as it's available, I'll be sure to submit it to the speaker so he can get it to the body.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right, so Senator Torres, I saw your hand go up.
No need. Ms. Boletto actually discussed the points that I was going to make, and what I'm concerned about is that as we go with recommendations for what we think would satisfy us, what I don't want this body to end up doing is dictating to them what their accounting practices have to be, because our role in passing the budget is separate and apart from what they do in terms of managing the government's finances. So I don't want to cross that line, and I believe a lot of this discussion was something that we had gone through as a body and voted against previously. So it's kind of a backdoor attempt almost. But I just wanted to, let you know that we appreciate your role as financial managers, and I don't see our role as dictating to what that practice is supposed to be. Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and proceed with the bookmark, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Try to figure out the language, but I'm just saying, with GASB as your guide, figure it out. But just so I can move on, we'll move and to Section 5, ACTC. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On Section 5, also comparing it to this current fiscal year's budget, the language is very similar. 90% of the reimbursements from the ACTC is deposited in the Income Tax Refund Efficient Payment Trust Fund, and the remaining 10% is used for, is deposited in the general fund for vacancies and overtime for the Department of Revenue and Taxation. I wanted to ask the Director of the Department of Revenue and Taxation, of that 10%, I know that ACTC is projected around 14 million, between 14 and 20 million. That's about $2 million. Have you been expending that 10% every fiscal year specifically for vacancies and overtime?
I believe we're doing that every year, Senator.
And the reason why I wanted to ask is because ACTC, it's a reimbursement from the federal government after we pay out the additional child tax credit. And so that money typically comes in practically at the end of the fiscal year. So how are we using money that doesn't really come in until the end of the year? How are we using that to fill vacancies and to pay for overtime when the actual dollars aren't available until the year ends?
I see where you're coming from. Like, I think there's only about 9 million that's reimbursed so far. So, like, we're expecting another amount, another probably 9 million, you know, by the end of this fiscal year. So, this is something that I believe my COA and budget will work on getting those funds quickly to our department and using those funds. So, I guess you're looking at the lapse between one fiscal year to the other fiscal year. I think that's what you're looking at.
So perhaps, because I understand the intent, and perhaps the language would need to be amended so that the Department of Revenue and Taxation is authorized to expend from the general fund amounts not to exceed the 10% of the projected ACTC reimbursements, and then the general fund shall be reimbursed when those ACTC funds come in. That way you're able to hire and fund the overtime sooner, and then the general fund gets paid back when the money actually comes in later. Would you be opposed to that kind of language?
That would be even better, yes. I mean, that would be nice.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, we'll work on some language to try and create a reimbursement mechanism with the ACTC so that they'll be authorized to expend 10% of the projected amounts for this purpose, and then when the ACTC funds come in, it reimburses the general fund for that expense. Because right now the way this is written is they can't expend that until the ACTC money actually comes in. And so if we created it more as a reimbursement mechanism, it'll allow them to access the funds as needed throughout the fiscal year.
Okay. So 5 is also bookmarked.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Section 6, excess, Section 30 revenues.
Mr. Speaker, could you take a 2-minute recess?
Yes. Okay. We're in section 6 now. Senator Estevez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion, or like to make an amendment to line 9, page 8 of the bill, which is to repeal section 6 in its entirety. Mr. Chairman, the reason I'm proposing this amendment is just because of this particular year, with the uncertainty of what the threshold is for the Section 830, we have adopted the conservative number of 68 million. My concern is with the blanket appropriation of excess funds of Section 30, I believe that that's going to make it difficult for this body to have the flexibility needed if it's discovered that there are additional funds available to make appropriations, other appropriations based on the needs of the government as we feel fit. And so I request that we strike this section, repeal Section 6, and strike it in its entirety. And I ask my colleagues for their input as to whether or not this could be beneficial or not, and for their support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a motion on the floor to strike the entire section 6. Any senator wish to be heard? Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have a question also that would further raise the issue of whether or not Section 6 should be stricken. When you look at the amount on Section 6 as $63,103,000, that is basically the line item on the revenues that were adopted. That's the line item of federal sources on page 3, line 6. That's the net after you add the Section 30 plus the immigration and passport fees, and then less out the overpayment for the make work pay credit of $5,500,000. But even if we adopted the quote-unquote conservative revenues of 68 million, the 68 million is the amount that would be remaining after the passage of the federal statute by our congresswoman for the payment of war claims. And so theoretically, anything over that 63,103,000 would already go into the war claims account anyway. So we wouldn't have any excess Section 30 money to be able to put into the provision for tax refunds.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if IRS nets it at the very beginning before they send it, or have we been paying it?
The Section 30, what's received for what?
Is it netted is it net of the make work tax credit, or have you been forgiven for some of that sometimes?
We have not heard from IRS of being forgiven for that liability. It's still being carried on our books. What is net once we receive the money is the bond payment. So the trustee takes off the top any amounts needed to satisfy the bond covenants, and then we get the remaining to use. Is that the question?
Well, that just further underscores, Mr. Chairman, because I'm trying to make sure the numbers are all reconciling. The amount that we are anticipating, worst case scenario, after the Congresswoman's measure passed to use excess Section 30 money above and beyond what was paid out in, I believe, 2014, was it? And that 2014 amount was the 68 million. So the 68 million is what we have here in our adopted revenue on page 3, line 8. That's 68,603,000 That's the amount that we received in 2014. And so anything above that 68 million would have to go to war claims. But when we are adding that plus the passport fees, and then we're lessening out the making work pay credit, that takes us to the 63 million figure that's here on section 6. But if there was any amount higher than the 68 million, it would automatically be going into the war claims anyway, so we wouldn't have it available for appropriation to the provision for tax refunds. And that's what this section 6 is saying we're supposed to do.
I think the document that we provided, or at least was provided to Senator Nelson yesterday, that we had all had received in April when we were discussing the TRAN, was that Interior was saying it was 68.
Right.
And they net out the document that we received didn't net out the 5. What 5 is saying is that any amount over the 63 would go to pay taxes. If we're correct, then there is not going to be any money anyway.
Right.
So there really is nothing major with this section. It's just saying that any money that it was our way in OFB of making sure that if it does come in at 78, or if you get another 9 million next year, that all the money in excess of that, the amount, would go to paying taxes. And as I understand it, when they received the 9 million in March, that was that was why that one week we saw this huge $15 million refund payment.
So anytime we receive any excess or anytime we receive ACTC, that automatically is used to pay whatever is outstanding in refunds. So it's just comes in, goes right back out. Is that the question? Yeah.
And so the reason I'm raising the question then is because if we strike section 6 and the amounts that come in excess of 63 million don't fall within that threshold that the Congresswoman set with the Section 30 money having to go to the war claims because it's interpreted differently, that money would not be prioritized for refunds the way this provision is saying it needs to be.
Even if we didn't, I think what they're doing is they realize that taxes have to be paid by October the 15th, and any excess they can possibly find, including excess that's not really excess, but they figure they can put off, they're paying tax refunds.
So if the intent of the administration is aligned with the language in the legislation, I'm curious why the need to strike it.
We in OFB put it in an overabundance of caution. With or without it, we are confident that the court order is probably stronger than any directive that we try to make from here. I mean, I think I've learned that over the last 12 years. Every time I try to direct them to do something, I can't get it, but the court somehow manages to get them to comply.
Yes, I think it's been the history that even this provision for tax refunds being put into a budget these are all different attempts by the legislature to force the payment of tax refunds, to prioritize the payment of tax refunds, and there have been so many efforts to try on the legislator's side to prioritize payment of tax refunds. And yes, I agree with you. The court decision has pretty much, I think, secured those payments now, guaranteed them, and DOA is doing a great job of getting those out. So yes, On the amendment, we had just talked about this under the section 3, and the administration is swearing that 149 is sufficient to pay this year's tax refunds and prior years' outstanding tax refunds. And just, if we are to get 10 million extra, though, I guess I would prefer that we deal with it somehow today instead of just letting it out there, because I feel like removing this provision allows the use of that money. The governor could still use that money without an appropriation for if we give him prior year authorizations, if they have some kind of settlement or you know, like wages or things like this, that we've seen them do this year after, you know, different times when we could things that were not predicted in the budget, where money was spent anyway because of legal liability or something like that. I just hate to see that happen to the extra 10 million. That if we have the extra 10 million, I would like to see that we put it to where we think it's needed, so that we lock it up almost, so that it's just not spent on anything, and that we be very direct about what we want that to be used on. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I cut off Senator Nicholas. Senator Nicholas, you be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my concern is that when you actually look at what this Section 6 says with respect to how it aligns with the adopted revenue, we may have a double appropriation problem, because this section says any amounts in Section 30 in excess of 63 million must go into the provision for tax refunds. But if you go to page 3, line 8, it has the Section 30 revenue at 68 million. And so if that 68 million is the adopted revenue and it does come in, that 5 million difference will automatically go into the provision for tax refunds. And so that 68 will immediately go down to 63. You add back the 1.8, and then you less out the 5,500,000, and you'll actually come up short on your federal sources. Because the way this is written is anything above 63 million must go into the provision for tax refunds. But the federal sources on page 3 is at 68. So you're having that, so you're going to have to less out on that 68 on page 3, you're going to have to less out the difference between 63 and the 63,103 and the 68,603. Because you're saying anything in excess of 63 goes into provision. But it's specifying Section 30. So it should say if federal sources, as adopted on page 3, Section B or whatever, if federal sources net of overpayment, that's when that's what the language should say. It shouldn't be limited to Section 30.
And the number that we have received from Interior was that we will be receiving 68. And so whether it's IRS nets out the 5 before it's sent to us, or it's sent to us, and I know before this administration, when I first came to the legislature, there were a couple of years where it wasn't being paid or it wasn't being deducted. So if it isn't being paid or it isn't deducted, then it's additional revenue.
Okay.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator, did you wish to continue, Madam Vice Speaker? Any others wish to be heard on the amendment to strike Section 6? Is there an objection to striking 6?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I object to
Okay.
strike. I think it would be better that we keep this in here just to make sure that the clarification is correct.
Okay. So there is an objection. Anybody else wish to be heard? Do you wish to close, Senator Estevez?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to withdraw my motion, my amendment.
Okay. Okay. So then, the motion to withdraw, any objection to withdrawing? It's now been withdrawn. Do we have any other issues with Section 6?
Yes. I would just like to ask DOA, with this language here, would this require you to deposit it into that trust refund, the 10 million, or what would happen?
It actually already is, so that's what we were talking about, that once we receive those funds,
Oh, the monthly.
we pretty much use all the money to pay refunds, and so it goes into the tax efficient account, then it's transferred into the tax refund checking account, then, we basically distribute all the checks from there. And then, like we mentioned, throughout the months for the rest of the fiscal year, general fund pays back what was put or what was paid out from that fund.
All right. I would ask that this section be bookmarked, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. I just want to point out that I think Senator Nicholas has been fighting a fight for 6 years now, trying to get them to do the provisions for tax refund. And by statute, we have been telling them that they're supposed to be putting money aside. And I don't know if we've succeeded on that quest, Senator Nicholas, and whether or not this is going to make it any better. But I'm just saying, I will defend them when they're deserve defending, but I want to put it on the record that they don't always comply with our statutory requirements, but it's neither here nor there. It's just that I wanted all the other members to understand that this has been an ongoing quest of Senator Nicholas's of getting them to comply with that provision. Okay, well, I'll bookmark it for right now. Section 7 is debt service. Does anybody have any issues with the debt service? These were the numbers that were given to us by Gita.
I just had a question, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
The list that Gita gave us yesterday had the same list for debt, but they also had on the bottom, I don't, oh no, leases that, I think they were in a different category. Are they in a different place in the bill?
Yes, the leases are in a different category. The payment for Teton is separate. Payment for GW is separate.
In different chapters?
In the DOE,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. The JFK was actually done with a bond, so it is on this list.
I think JFK,
It's just the Teton.
JFK and Ukudu, but yeah, there's Teton and, I don't know, maybe just Teton and UOG is UOG. And, yeah, all right. We'll find it then when we get there.
Okay. Senator Nicholas, on Section 7, any other?
Yes, just I guess just a point to raise or a question or I don't know, maybe a request for some guidance, but it was mentioned earlier that we're trying to put so much emphasis on making sure that we follow the general accounting principles for government accounting. And recently, GASB has required that we account for our unfunded liability of our retirement fund as public debt. And I'm curious as to whether or not the time has come for us to begin accounting for it as a debt service and an appropriation for the debt service in this object category, as opposed to it being combined into the budgets of every individual agency's personnel costs, as it historically has been done. I raise this point because it creates several issues. The first is that under the current practice of including our unfunded liability under the personnel costs, it inflates the expenditures per agency, and it looks like we're spending a much larger sum on the functions of that agency, when a large portion of it, particularly those that are personnel heavy, is actually being put back into the retirement fund to retire the unfunded liability. And this has several domino effects. For example, with the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, for example, the personnel costs that also includes the unfunded liability makes it look like we're appropriating a larger amount to GMH for its operation, when 30% of the personnel costs actually gets factored out for the retirement fund. The same goes for DOE, etc. And in the case of DOE, it further exacerbates the amounts that are taken out of the Department of Education to go towards the charter schools, because those are inclusive of the per pupil expenditures, but those per pupil expenditures are inclusive of unfunded liability costs that aren't necessarily education expenditures. They're actually debt service expenditures. And so if you were to factor out the debt, then the per pupil cost will drop, and then the amounts that would go to charter schools would be adjusted accordingly. And so if we're having the conversation today about trying to become more aligned of government accounting principles, then perhaps we should discount the cost of our unfunded liability from the personnel budgets of all of the agencies, and instead include it as a debt service for continuing appropriations. In other words, I mean, simplifying it, Mr. Speaker, GASB says to look at unfunded liabilities like a bond. And so should we perhaps include that as a bond here in this list and appropriate for it as a bond, and then adjust all of the agency appropriations accordingly? Because right now every agency's appropriations are inflated by 30% on the personnel side.
I understand what you're saying. I had to plead ignorance in that I don't know how to be able to do that, but I will, in discussions with the OPA over the next several months, try to figure out how for next year we can address that in the same way that we're, for the first time this year, netting out the ACTC out of income tax. But I assure you I will sit down with her and try to figure out if there's a way that we can extract that and just make it a one line item in payment for retirement fund. Because I mean, have you seen the pie chart for government expenditure? There is 7% of the total pie goes to retirement for insurance and for the payment of the unfunded liability. And so I will seek her guidance on how to propose to all of you in next year's budget how that might or could be done. And I will do that early enough so that you guys can have an idea of what's happening with that. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions on the list on section 7?
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I was just wondering whether you highlighted the increase in the debt service between fiscal year 17 and 18?
Yes.
The total amount of?
87?
No, not the final figure, but the adjustment upward. fiscal year 17, the debt service was
79.
$79 million. And in fiscal year 18, it will be adjusted upward to 85.1. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to ensure that the public's aware of that. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Any other questions on Section 7 on the debt service?
Mr. Speaker, is it possible, I mean, trying to remember the mechanism for the Simon Sanchez? Is that's not a bond or anything, that was just a lease, that's another lease?
I believe it went out for rebid. We haven't secured, I think it's still in the RFP process because it had to be rebid.
If that's secured during the fiscal year, I mean, is that supposed to be reflected like the Teton lease? Is that a similar mechanism? Do you remember? I can't
When
remember.
it happens?
Yes.
I'm really hoping when it happens, and it's soon, that we will reflect it. But right now, it is not a current obligation that we have to be making payments on and for which we have to budget for.
No, I understand. I'm just saying, if you did, wouldn't be looking like one of these debts. It's going to be looking more like the T's and lease provision that you have in this bill in another chapter. Is that the way Simon Sanchez is?
I think it's a lease back.
Lease back.
So when they finally sign the document, then we'll know how we're
How
to
much?
report it.
Yes. But can you explain to me, how are they able to sign the document if we haven't provided for it in a budget?
We've authorized it in statute to undertake the effort. How they're doing it is executive. We've just made the policy decision that they shall. And there was that whole issue of whether or not it's more than 100 million.
Right.
And that whole, so until we see that document, I really don't know how to be able to report it and whether or not we're going to be reporting it as a lease back or if it's going to be a bond.
Oh, what is the potential source of payment, Mr. Speaker, on that? I just can't remember. I'm trying to remember. Is that
In the statute, it's TEFF.
Oh, okay. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I want to thank Senator Uggan for raising the point about the increase in the debt service from 79 million last year to 85 million this year. When you look at the debt service amounts, it isn't due to any new debt necessarily that was taken on, as it is so much the increase in the debt service from the current fiscal year to the next. And I just wanted to put on the record why the debt service is increasing from this fiscal year into next fiscal year. It's a $6 million increase in debt service for the same existing debt.
It's the increase in the Section 30 bond.
Yes, that was floated for in 2016, but it's increasing. The debt service is increasing from 10.9 million to 14 million, and I wanted to put on the record what the purpose of that increase is. What's causing it to go up to 14 million?
It's a debt schedule that we agreed to. There may have been earlier a lesser amount because it was cap-eyed.
Yes, and I wanted to put on the record that capitalized interest has a cost, because when we entertained these measures back in those years, we entertained it looking at the capitalized interest and the lower debt service at the time. But here we are today, we're spending $6 million more on that debt service, and we also have the added cost of the extended amortization of that debt service because we capitalize the interest. It has been the repeated practice for bond measures to come before this body, recommending capitalized interest as a financing mechanism not only for these general obligation bonds, but also for the revenue bonds in our utility agencies. And what happens is over time, it results in increasing costs, not only to the taxpayer, but also to the ratepayer in the utility agencies. And so I just wanted to underscore that point as we entertain any future borrowing, that the capitalized interest question needs to be taken into context with the fact that all of us in here, I think, can agree that if we had that extra $6 million or $4 million or whatever else it might have been, if we did not take the capitalized interest up front, we would have been able to utilize those funds for additional needs throughout the government. So I just wanted to put it on notice for the record that we should seriously reconsider the use of capitalized interest, because while it makes for a good selling point in the beginning of the debt, it eventually comes back and adds cost to us later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for pointing that out, Senator Nicholas. And at some point, we're going to all have to make that discussion on how these things are negotiated and whether or not we want to, whether or not we can put into the statute or the authorization that you can or you can't. I'm not sure if we want to be doing that, but I thank you for pointing that out, that the capitalized interest does incur an additional expense to us. Okay? So is there anything that anybody wants to add in section 7? Can we close 7? Okay, we're now going to how to divide the pie. OFB has prepared for all of you, and I believe has been distributed to everyone, a cheat sheet, spreadsheet, whatever, some kind of, hopefully will help, because we noticed that people were asking how much was 15, how much was 16, how much was 17, and so we've given you everything there in the budget, and so we're now in Chapter 2, Education. The administration were asked to leave after the, or told to get back to work after they go through the revenue, but there's been a request by a couple of senators, and Senator Rodriguez isn't here to hear the presentation that he requested, but as Senator Estevez also wanted that same report. So before we start into the chapter, I guess, do you want to hear from them, and then we can go through it and discuss it and afterwards, or?
Yes, I think that would be better because they have to leave. So
Well,
we should
I
get them
mean,
before they go.
either that or you can
Call them
ask
back.
them to stay. I don't,
Can you?
I'm not the governor. They were told to go back to work afterwards, so I've only asked them for the revenue, but
So can we?
they can explain this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Last request of members.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, good afternoon, Senators. We submitted today a memo as well as a spreadsheet dated August 17th to the Speaker regarding BBMR's review of the OFB 9+3 presentation relative to FY 2017 departmental lapses. I'll just go ahead and read off the memo. Hafide Speaker Cruz, attached herewith is the Bureau's analysis of financial information presented by the Office of Finance and Budget. This is being provided in response to Senator Rodriguez's request of BBMR during the August 3rd, 2017 public hearing on Substitute Bill 22-34 COR. The attached analysis contains required adjustments to appropriation levels reported by OFB in the August 3rd presentation to be consistent with appropriations in Public Law 33-185, also known as the FY 2017 Budget Act. It should be noted that several of the appropriation levels in column A of the presentation were either under or overstated when compared to the respective appropriation levels in 33-185. The attachment also includes a few adjustments to projected expenditure levels to the Bureau's 9+3 report that we transmitted on July 20th, as well as other departmental funding requirements made known to the Bureau as of today, August 18, 2017. I'd like to remind all senators that at the August 3rd public hearing, my acting director, Lester Carlson, iterated that projected lapses reflected in OFB's presentation should not be used as a basis to determine department levels for FY18 for several reasons. This included the fact that BBMR's 9+3 expenditure projection reflected levels as of the date of that report, which is July 20th, 2017, as the levels were subject to change by the close of the fiscal year. Case in point, the Guam Police Department's level in OFB's presentation reflected a lapse of I'm sorry, I'm just going to read it out, $1,142,942. The Bureau's updated level in the attachment shows a reduced level of $214,000. The adjustment is attributed to additional funding requirements reported by the, I'm sorry, there's a typo there. It should read by the Guam Police Department to the Bureau earlier this month, which included the need to procure new police vehicles due to impending return of leased vehicles, payment of prior obligations, etc. The remaining projected lapse of $214,000 is due to a low tracking for GPD's Police Service Fund, of which funds are being held in reserve until such time that collection levels improve. With that said, while GPD was initially reflecting a 1.1 million quote-unquote lapse in OFB's August 3rd presentation, the actual amount is approximately $214,000 as of today, and may again change prior to the close of FY17. This is just one example of the danger in using the levels reflected in OFB's August 3rd presentation as a basis to determine departmental levels for FY18. Please be reminded that there are still 6 weeks remaining in the fiscal year, and financial files for FY 2017 won't actually close until November or December, depending on the Department of Administration's time frame for final accounting adjustments. With that said, the Bureau cannot stress enough that all senators exercise caution when deliberations take place on the operations budgets for all departments listed in the aforementioned OFB presentation and in the attachment, which was provided with the memorandum. Thank you.
Any of you have questions of Mr. Mariano,
Yes,
Senator
I just
Nelson?
have a question for GPD on item G. So on page 3 of 3, column G, there's a is this saying that there's $214,000 left as of August 18, 2017?
Well, yeah, and that's in line with my earlier statement that, yeah, that $214,000 is an amount that is currently being placed in reserve from the Police Services Fund. And again, it's because the tracking levels aren't in line with the current appropriation levels.
And then in column H, you have BBMR versus Public Law 33-185. Can you explain that 1.142 million figure?
I'm sorry, for which department?
Column H, same. We're still going over GPD, okay. Page 3 of 3, column H.
Yeah, if you
Can
notice,
you explain that
if you notice, yeah, I'm just going to explain a little bit about the spreadsheet. If you look at the column headers there's three different, there are three different colors. The ones in pink, columns A, D, and H are consistent with the levels in OFB's presentation of August 3rd. Everything in blue is our input,
Okay,
And everything, I mean, column I, which is in green, is the variance between their level and our adjusted level.
okay.
Okay.
And so, as of August 18, 2017, Guam Fire Department has 949,343.
That's correct.
Okay.
But, you know, again, you know, our disclaimer is we're 6 weeks away from the end of the fiscal year, and we're several months away from the official closing of the books. So these amounts are subject to change in most cases. In most, if not all cases, the levels will continue to decrease.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Colleagues, I want to thank BBMR for this presentation because it only underscores what I have been presenting to all of you. When OFB presented me with their projected revenue, and we finally just came to an understanding of how much revenue there was, I realized that the amount of money available for expenditure for next year hadn't increased by any substantial amount. So my instruction to them was, is there any way that we can keep everybody in place? And so their suggestion was a rollover budget. And I asked them, OFB, would that mean that there would be a shortfall of anything? And they brought back to me the report that was given to them, the 9+3, which showed considerable amount of money that wasn't being expended for the departments that you were concerned about, Senator Nelson, that are now claiming that any amount of money that's not given to them is going to be denying people on the street. By their own admission, they've not given 100% of what we appropriated last year to these two departments. And they're admitting to it, that the cash isn't there to give it. And then I call all of your attention to, again, the CRER that they provided us, all of you, the other day. And the CRER is Consolidated Revenue and Expenditure Report. And if you go to page starting on page 5, page 4 of 7, and going on to 7 of 7, you'll see the and on page 4, you'll see on the protection of life that as of June the 30th, though the legislature had appropriated $33,771,000, they had only expended and encumbered about $23 million, leaving them fund available of almost $10 million. So for 3 months, for the next 3 months, they'd have $3 million available. So I went through, and even if I have a whole set of accountants here, I did this on my little calculator. If you divide up what we appropriated to them, and if they were to receive 1/12 of their appropriation every single month, because of this belief that it's imperative that public safety receive every dollar that is due to them in order to protect us, they should have been receiving $2.8 million per month. From their own report of the $22 million expenditures as of June the 30th, they had only been receiving $1.8 million a month. They'd been shorted $1 million a month. And so in order for them to spend the rest of the 10 million, their monthly allocation for the last 3 months would have to be 3.4 million a month. So,
Yes, and I see that discrepancy also in Department of Revenue and Taxation. I see that discrepancy in judiciary, but it doesn't explain later on in the budget. I'm sure that we'll discuss how there's additional allocations that wasn't even, there was no public law for these positions.
If
And
I-
so
If I could
maybe Ms.
explain.
Boleto can speak on that.
Yeah, particularly with public safety, you know, a lot of the reasons why they're not able to utilize the full budget, especially when they're just authorized for positions in the beginning of the year. We talked yesterday about how the recruitment process for the Department of Administration is a lengthy process, especially when it comes to public safety. Those are our highest application numbers, and because we have to do due diligence at every step of recruitment, it does take a long time to get the agencies their certified list. And so that's the issue that we have with public safety, why even though it may not seem that they're spending according to what they need, it's because those positions have not been filled yet. However, like with the fire, or particularly I know with the police department, they just filled quite a number of positions towards, I believe, the second quarter, as well as promotions. You have GFD that has authorized positions that we're still processing the applications for. I mentioned yesterday there was 1,100 applications. We still have customs. We have 798 applications pending for their positions. And then the police chief, and believe me, I'm intimately aware of this because the police chief, the fire chief, DOC director, and the customs director have me on speed dial when it comes to their positions. They are very aggressive in trying to move those along because they desperately need the people, but we just have to make sure we do due diligence in processing those applications. The police chief is concerned because he does have another 25 positions that are coming up. His list has been exhausted, so therefore we're going to need to announce that position again and then go through the whole process to basically qualify their listing and then send that to them. So, you know, unfortunately, the delay is not within the departments not spending or not trying to spend what they need to, but because of the government's process and filling those positions, that's the delay. Once those positions, if they're filled in the second, third, or fourth quarter, we have to fund them for the entire year, the following year. So that's the concern that we have when we say we're going to do, you know, a rollover budget. If you're factoring out the amount that wasn't spent because those positions weren't filled right away, we're going to have a problem next year.
Have you filled according to Public Law 33-163, have any positions been filled for FY17?
For which department?
GPD.
GPD, yes. DOC, GPD. Right now, we're filtering through the Guam Fire Department's applications. The testing has already started for the written test. Thereafter, we'll go into the physical agility test, and then we'll be able to put together the certified listing. We are targeted to go into customs right after that and start doing the ratings and evaluations. Same process. They're going to need to be tested, and you know, we have to go through that with each of the law enforcement cycles. It's more intensive. And then in certain agencies, I believe both police and DOC have to go through a psychological evaluation. So there's so many requirements before they can actually get that warm body on the payroll.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Lee, did you have any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. For Ms. Boleto, so just so I'm clear, if you could maybe provide further clarity for all of the members. What you're saying is the reason why we haven't been able to get warm bodies into the Guam Police Department and the Guam Fire Department is it's HR processing issue. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that it depends, because with GPD, they already had an existing listing. Once we have an established list, that list is good for a year. So GPD was fortunate with the authorization of the additional officers every year. They had an existing listing to pull from.
Understood.
But yeah, so once positions are authorized in any of the law enforcement departments, then that initiates the announcement. Then from the
Understood.
announcement, we have a certain number of days that's mandated by our rules that announcement must stay open. Then once the applications are received, we have to go through every single application and ensure that they meet the minimum requirements. So it is a
Understood. Yeah,
lengthy,
I'm
yes.
aware that there's a human resources process that DOA needs to follow.
Correct.
But I'm just wanting to make sure that is it an HR issue or is it a cash management issue?
It's not a cash management issue. You know, it's being able to fill those bodies, because once they're on the payroll, then it gets factored into the payroll costs.
It's not a cash management issue.
It's to fill those personnel? No.
Okay. Thank you.
If it's not a cash management issue, if you look at the last line that they have, the difference in the lapse between their and OFB's was just $1.2 million. They still have $8 million in lapses.
No,
And with the transfer authority,
if
there
I may,
could be-
can I just qualify something there, Mr. Speaker? The reason why there's only a 1.1 million lapse, if you look back at page 203 for the Department of Public Health, we did make a corrective adjustment to the expenditure level. For technical reasons, our office over reported the expenditure level for public health at 4.7 million. So with those adjustments, the net impact was a $5 million reduction or increase to the bottom line. Okay, if you were to net out that one anomaly from the entire spreadsheet or the bottom line, for instance, if you go to column G, our level is at 8.7 million. If you net out that one anomaly of 4.7 million, our adjustments in the end were approximately 3.9 million. In other words, from a level of 9.9 million initially reported by OFB on August 3rd, netting out that one anomaly brings the actual bottom line variance down to 3.9 million, or approximately 5.9 less than what was originally stated in that presentation. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that it's really skewed. The bottom line is really skewed by one adjustment, one large adjustment
And
for one department.
You're talking about the grand total and
Yes,
bottom.
the grand total, that's correct, on page 3.
Thank you, sir.
Again, I just wanted to make it clear to everybody. My instruction to OFB was to keep everybody in place. And we did not, I will repeat it twice, the 9+3 was not our justification. The 9+3 was a demonstration from OFB to prove to me that they would not be losing people, that they still had lots of money available to them in every single one of these departments.
Mr. Chair, if the instruction was to keep everyone in place, what do you mean by that? Just make sure that we still had the same amount of workforce and jobs, that so no one...
To keep the department whole,
Okay,
and to make sure that we didn't reduce anybody,
okay,
so there were no cuts.
okay.
But they still had their vacancy pool. They still have the money that they could have and should have been using. We gave them vacancy pools since 14. And it's been dragging that long. But we have been trying to fill those positions, I assure you. I have been trying to give public safety money. There was a time when I was chair of public safety, and they were repudiating me when I tried to give them $2.2 million in overtime because they only wanted 6. 600. I'm just saying, it's not that I don't want to. I have been trying, and I even established the
But-
vacancy pool to assist them.
My concern is that we're following the law, and in Public Law 33-163 specifically states that we need to start funding and appropriating for GPD to hire
and
more
they will have enough, because
officers.
if you heard the testimony that was given,
But then I'm curious about rev and tax. If you said we're trying to keep everyone whole, but then you specifically give them $1 million more for jobs and for vacancies that they haven't even filled. It's the same situation, except GPD's process hiring is more. The requirement is longer and more strenuous.
well, no, I admitted in the first public hearing, I admitted that our proposed bill gives rev and tax additional personnel, because we have been fighting with them for the last several years, trying to get them to do all the collections. And we're trying to assist in collections, because if we can assist in collections, then there will be all the cash to be able to deal with all the rest of them. If we don't collect the cash, then it doesn't matter. We can want to have 60 more people at GPD, but if we don't collect the money, then there's not going to be any hiring.
I think that they should be given the same requirement, that they should fill the 30 vacancies that they have from FY17, the vacancies that they have for FY16, before we start allocating $1 million to them for additional personnel.
And if it's your decision to not give it to them, that's fine. When
No,
we
I'm
get
just
to that
saying that if you're
section-
going to when you're saying that you're trying to keep everyone in place, but you're contradicting yourself with this bill. But I guess maybe we can talk about it when we get there. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Nicholas, and then Senator Agan, and then Senator Espaldon? No.